around the corner, and that means it is time for the Left Wing's Bumper Six Nations preview. I'm Will Slattery, and I'm delighted to be joined for today's chat by Luke Fitzgerald and by our man over in Portugal, Ruaidhri O'Connor, who is still over with the Irish team. Simon Easterby's side kicked things off against England at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, and they will obviously be going for a third Six Nations trophy in a row, which would be an unprecedented moment in the history of the tournament, going all the way back to the beginning. There's been a couple of shared championships in the course of three in a row that have been done, but no team has technically won three outright. So a big carrot for Ireland if they can get that done by St. Patrick's weekend. Rudd, I might go to you first. You can maybe give us a bit of a lay of the land over in Portugal. I know you've been there for a couple of days. You were at the launch in Rome before that. You've been talking to Simon Easterby. You were talking to David Humphreys, the IRFE performance director, a couple of players as well. I think Andrew Goodman was up for media today. So you might be able to give us a sense of where the team is at heading into this Saturday.
Yeah, it's been... we were just on to Luke beforehand. There is a bit of a different vibe over here than I think the media interactions are slightly more relaxed, and the team do seem to be in good form. I mean, sometimes you can read too much into this stuff, but there's definitely even just being on the sideline for those first 10 minutes of training where they let the cameras in. There's I've been to a couple of those at this stage, and they felt like they're in a good place. They're either laughing or joking. You kind of see senior players hanging out with some of the younger players, like who've come on tour. I saw Josh van der Veer spending time with James McNabney. I've seen groups of players out and about. That a lot of the time when you're with Ireland, the players kind of divide into kind of provincial groups and go off and do their own thing. But I saw a group out for lunch with senior players, uncapped lads, all out together enjoying themselves. I think there seems to be a bit of a targeted effort there as well. I think they come into it in a good place in terms of, a lot of them have played very good rugby in the last couple of weeks, which is, they were here in November before the All Blacks game, but they didn't really have any significant form to fall back on. They were almost falling back on what they'd done the previous season. So now they've had those European games. A lot of them played very well in them. Obviously, whatever optimism I have took a bit of a hit on Sunday when I heard that Ty Furlong had been on a plane home that morning and that he was probably going to miss the England game, which obviously was confirmed later that day. And that is a significant blow. But I would say they're confident, they're in good form, they're calm. But the vibe I'm hearing from England is that they're in the same spot. Like, they named their team early. That Borthwick let David Walsh into training for 3 days last week, almost like, come and see us. There's a vibe coming out of them as well, and you can read too much into vibes. So it's been an interesting couple of days, been worth the trip. Humphreys was good on a load of different topics yesterday. It was interesting to get his perspective on things. And we go home tomorrow, and the real business kind of kicks into big gear once Simon Easterby names his team on Thursday.
Yeah, lots to get to there. Rod, there's one thing I want to ask you about specifically, because I was reading your copy from the press conference today with Andrew Goodman, and he was talking about, I suppose, the emphasis they put on skills in the build-up. That was an area in November that for sure let the team down and was pretty stark in terms of watching them versus what we're used to seeing from them in terms of how crisp their handling usually is. The low error count we associate with Ireland when they're playing very well, that wasn't really there. So it was interesting that was kind of, he name-checked that as an area that they've really focused on, because for me, if they want to get back to the kind of the heydays of 2023 and 2022, that's one thing that they definitely need to get right. So what did you make of him kind of honing in on that piece of it?
Yeah, it's been obviously a topic that's come up with Paul O'Connell as well. It's partly, Andy Farrell's key message coming out of November was, we have to turn up ready to work. We have to turn up ready to Ireland have been a good team for starting off windows, most notably in Marseille this time last year, and they weren't in November. They were poor against New Zealand, 21 handling errors in that game, 28 handling errors against Australia. I guess it's a very obvious thing to go after. The issue, I think, is that the majority of the players have been playing with a different focus at Leinster, and the Leinster phase attack hasn't been brilliant either. They seem to suggest that there was a lot of opportunity in November, that they were one or two passes away, one or two skill moments away from putting them away, and things would have looked a lot rosier in the garden. There's also a physicality element. There's other parts to it. It's doing things on your own terms that probably wasn't as good as it has been in November. But if you're going to try and reduce, if you want to go for the kind of obvious fixes for November, get the penalty count down, the yellow card count down, and get the error count down. And they beat Australia, Fiji, and Argentina, and they were beating the All Blacks with 20 minutes to go. So it's not like they fell off a cliff in November. They didn't play well, but they were still a good enough team to get those, be in those games. while playing badly. So if they fix those, then they're going to look like a much better team. And I guess the question is whether the standards across the Six Nations have risen to take them down, because they are the champions. They've been the best team in the tournament for the last 2.5 years. France have been there with them. England have kind of flattered to deceive and got knocked them off their perch last year, but they've obviously had a rough run of results. So what's going to be good enough for Ireland to win this tournament? Well, if you bring that error count down, that's an obvious one.
The line out as well, you'd throw into that, wouldn't you, in terms of
Yes.
discipline
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the handling. Luke, for me, like, Rudd touched on it there, like the big picture question that I have coming into this championship, and I think it'll dictate whether Ireland can go and win three in a row, is how the Ireland coaches and the players, I guess, reconcile the Leinster identity that Rudd touched on, that's in year two of Jackie Nabers becoming more and more pronounced with every game, and the way Ireland have traditionally played and how they played well when they've been really motoring, which is kind of a more attack-focused mindset, which maybe aligned better when Stuart Lancaster was coaching the Leinster team. Like, what's your view on what Ireland will look like on Saturday and then against Scotland and going into this tournament? Will it be a kind of a meld of what Leinster do well at the moment and what Ireland have done well in the past, or are they going to be kind of caught at cross purposes, and we'll see that kind of maybe a defensive intensity, but maybe that kind of slick attack or that handling isn't still quite there? What do you reckon is the most likely outcome this weekend and going forward for the rest of the championship?
Oh, the most likely outcome. I wish you hadn't asked me that. I think, look, I think you probably called out the key worry in most Ireland supporters' mind is, Leinster obviously ticking along the best of all the provinces, Munster showing some promise, but obviously Connacht as well, but in a kind of a worse competition, I suppose. But, you know, Leinster obviously make up the majority of the squad. How are they going to deal with coming into camp and having to change? I suppose my view on that is, like, I think dialing it down might not be such a bad thing. I do worry that they're not as exposed to giving opponent attacker. Sorry, I'm talking about obviously the defense, opposition attackers that little bit more time and space on the ball. That does take a little bit of time to get used to, Will. But I also think the difference will be if they do take their foot off the pedal a little bit coming off the line, that maybe they'll have a little bit more in the tank and they might be able to produce some of those skills and think a little bit more clearly, which might address some of those issues that Rhodes mentioned about, error count and penalty count, because a lot of those things come from, burning yourself out, that kind of way, in that kind of Leinster system. So, yeah, look, it's going to be difficult to reconcile the two. I think, look, it's the biggest challenge with the first match of the tournament, isn't it? It's trying to get yourself ready. Basically, you've got a week to do it, and then you're into preparation for, like, kind of fairly specific game preparation the week of the test match. So you kind of have to get everyone on the same page fairly quickly. Now, the one good thing for Ireland is that there's a huge amount of familiarity in the squad. A lot of senior players who've been in there for a long time. I think the coaches will understand. I think they've got a strong coaching setup too, in that, yes, they'll miss Farrell, but there's a lot of guys who've been in there for a very long period of time, so I think they'll know the personalities. I'm hoping at this stage that they'll be able to get those messages across, and they'll know how to land it with the players, if you like, because they know the players so well. So that's probably playing into Ireland's favor a little bit, with if they want to make some kind of slight changes. And my recommendation would have been to probably only make some slight tweaks anyway. Like, I don't think there's a massive amount that's wrong with Ireland. I think, you get a few of those areas right, which I think they're very capable of doing. Then I think this looks a lot different. And the good thing for Ireland is that they're bloody hard to beat at home. Like, unbelievable record in the championship at home. I think only 2 home losses since 2013. I think in the Six Nations. And even if they're not playing well, they're hard to beat. So if they're playing well, so if you change a few of those things, all of a sudden you're starting to play well. In my mind, I think they should be beating most of the teams in the competition. France being the only one you'd be probably most worried about. But look, England we'll get to England in a little bit. They've obviously named their squad, so we've a bit more to discuss in terms of who's on the paddock for them. But it's a strong English team. I will say that. I quite like the look of it, and I think their bench looks pretty decent as well. So it's a big challenge, but. Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge for Ireland in this competition, is can they just make the slight tweaks? And they're well capable, but it's difficult to do under this kind of pressure, Will. That's the only thing I would say. They're difficult things to do. They seem small out here, but they're people become ingrained and they become used to doing things a certain way, and certainly a challenge for them.
Yeah, Rud, like, what's your perspective on, I suppose, the Leinster style coming into the international window? I was thinking earlier, what would it look like in a best case scenario if they confuse what Leinster have done well with what Ireland do well at their best? And I kind of thought, is it kind of what we saw in the second test against South Africa in that first half when Ireland were very physical, Springbok bodies were dropping. Conor Murray, got that try. It was a very well worked try. Like the handling was pretty slick that day. They created a few more opportunities they just didn't take in that first half. I think they were 10 points to the good. I suppose the flip side is they did look a little low on petrol in that second half, and the discipline, kind of cost them. Andre Pollard kicked a number of penalties, and then Kieran Frawley saved the day. But that first half, is that a blueprint maybe to what it could look like if everything comes together?
Yeah, my only risk factor with that is I think there was a lot of emotion in that performance. Andy Farrell basically ripped them a new one in the week. He was so disappointed with the way they played in the first test. It was the last game of the season. It was I wouldn't say last thing of a dying wasp, but it was like one last massive effort for the end of a season, and they put it all out there. And I think to win a Grand Slam or a Six Nations, yes, you have to be emotional, but across the season, you can't. That pitch that they hit that day, like I'd say that was the most physical Irish performance I've ever seen. That first 40 minutes. I mean, there was Springbok World Cup winners leaving the field with bloodied with broken arms from Irish. A team that usually dominates teams physically was getting absolutely dominated. I know in the second half their scrum roared back and it was a very different game, but that first 40 minutes was an incredible level of physicality. Like as close to the 2009 second test of the Lions Tour as I've seen, probably, in terms of just what the level they went to. So, yes, there is a template. Like they were accurate that day when they had the ball. They did an awful lot right, and they have borrowed from the Nina Aber template. They've definitely seen bits that they like the way they barge around the ruck, the way they just make life absolutely miserable for the opposition on the ruck when they're doing it well. I don't think their line speed is as aggressive, but Ringrose is still snapping out of that line pretty lively as well. And I'm sure that Leinster players are coming in a little bit like they did when Lancaster was there and saying, look, this stuff is working. We love it. What can we do of this? And Easterby, I suppose, in this window is saying, okay, we can do this and this, but we still want to keep our identity here. And their DNA, they're very proud of their attacking DNA. They're very proud of the way they play with Ireland. And they know that when it goes well, they can break teams. So yes, if you can get a hybrid of the two, absolutely. But like Nienaber puts less focus on attack because he thinks his defense is good enough to win games. And that, you don't need to score 20, 30, 40 points to win games. That if you keep them to 12, 13, then you just need to get to 20. So it's a more economical way of playing. I think it probably preserves energy. So there's a balance to be struck. I was worried about it when I saw the Leinster players go out against Bristol and look so poor in that first half an hour over there. In terms of like transitioning back into Leinster from Ireland, that looked really difficult for them. It was a narrow run in. New Zealand was a tough start, and I think part of that was they were undercooked, but also part of it was you're trying to get up to speed on a game plan you haven't been playing for a while. So it's definitely one of the big risk items with Ireland coming into the Six Nations.
Rud, you mentioned last week with Joe Malloy and No Sport that you saw Johnny Sexton in the airport. He was maybe trying to get over to Portugal a little incognito. We've now seen photos of him on the training pitch looking quite involved. Like, has there been any light shed, or have you gleaned, how much influence he's having in the build-up? Because it seems from the outside looking in that he's maybe more involved now with Andy Farrell departed than he was in November. I'm not sure if that's a fair summation or what you've learned.
It's hard to know because we got very little information in November, but like he wasn't here today. I think he was here for the weekend, but he's gone back to his day job for the rest of the week. And I think it's pretty clear that he's there as a mentor to the 310s. He's there to help develop their kicking strategy and work on their kicking strategy. He sits with the players after training, Sam Prendergast, Jack Rowley, Kieran Frawley after training, goes through their footage with them. I think he's having weekly chats with them, even when they're going back to their provinces. They have his number. He's there as a mentor and a kind of a coach, and to review anything they need to review if they want to go to him. He's also there if any of the leaders want to go to him. I know the coaches are bouncing stuff off him. They're kind of. I'm sure he's having some input on the game plan without being like, if you're not there all the time, I don't think he can be fully considered an assistant coach. But I do think that he's such a smart rugby brain. He will see stuff in the game on Saturday, even though if he's not in the coaching box. And I'm sure he's feeding that in for the Monday morning review. I'm sure if he sees something in England's game that he thinks they can break down, they'll be listening to him because he's Johnny Sexton and he's such a good rugby brain. So certainly he's having an influence, and I'm sure as time goes on that influence will grow. but it is only a couple of sessions, at most a week, and he's not there on match days, so you wouldn't want to overstate it too much either.
Yeah, fair enough. I just wanted to get a kind of an insight into it because obviously seeing him on the training pitch for the first time, officially photographed in his Ireland gear, was interesting, and just to get a sense of how influential, or as you say, kind of stepped back in some ways in certain aspects of the preparation. So that's interesting. Luke, I want to discuss some selection issues now. The team will be named on Thursday, as you said. England have already named their team. Marcus Smith is starting it out half. Alex Mitchell's fit enough to start at scrum half. That's massive for them. Caden Murley surprisingly picked on the wing. I don't think that had been flagged too much. He's a Harlequins flyer. A lot of people would have seen him play in the Premiership. The Curry brothers starting on the flanks. Interestingly, Ollie Chesham is being kept in reserve. Chandler Cunningham South kept in reserve. Tom Willis kept in reserve in a 6-2 split. That's a very impactful forward kind of set of the bench you can bring on. So from an Ireland perspective, there's a couple of things up for grabs that might be kind of interesting to discuss. Like, hooker is one. Dan Sheehan made his return from that ACL injury, only a 6-month absence in the end, or maybe just about 7 months. He looked very sharp in some ways against the Stormers. I suppose the line-out was still a little bit of a struggle. Like, how much do you think he should feature this Saturday?
I'd probably have him on the bench this Saturday. I think that 1-2 punch, I think, is it's such a strength for Ireland when the two guys are available, that I would definitely be utilising that. I think it's great to have him, at this stage, he's had 62 minutes, I think he was on for. So I think that's for an international, I'd probably like to see him have a little bit more. And I think he can be very destructive when the game opens up. So that's why I probably prefer the second half for him. It'd be a nice introduction. And a nice string to Ireland's bow there as well. I think you want to have a little bit of impact off the bench. And I think it protects him a little bit too. I think brilliant to have him back. You'd obviously be a little bit concerned more so probably with Furlong. You just love, you talk about a 1-2 punch. Like, you really do miss having him there. He's a big loss to the team, I think. And something that we probably haven't mentioned about Ireland, maybe we haven't mentioned because I don't know if everyone else is looking at it, but we've talked about it a few times on the podcast. I think that one of the biggest things for Ireland to get their attack right, aside from the skills side of things, I think is actually the ball handling amongst the pack. I think when Ireland are playing at their best, generally a couple of times in a game, you see Doris going through a hole or Byrne putting someone through a hole, but it could be Furlong throwing a pass. And oftentimes, I think Ireland have kind of fallen in love with throwing the pass out the back, whereas I think when they're playing their best, they're very combative, they're very physical, but the forwards are also able to pass inside and outside to different options, and it makes them very difficult to defend against. And I feel like both Leinster and Ireland have gone a little bit away from that in the last while. And that's an area where Sheehan's great, but it's also an area where we miss Furlong a little bit. So that's just maybe a point that I was thinking about when we were talking about Ireland and getting a bit of momentum and a bit of excitement back into their attack. Forwards, I think, could be taking a bit more responsibility on and being a bit more direct and trusting those ball handling skills. Like, I think if you look at what's differentiated with Ireland and other teams, all those guys are great passers of the ball. They're good catchers. They're all able to move quite well. They've got lateral, they've got a bit of a sidestep on them. They've got good pace. So that's maybe something to watch out for. Maybe I think that's a loss of Furlong, but Sheehan is great to have back in that respect. In terms of England, and you mentioned some of the guys there, yeah. Look, I mean, Murley's an obvious place where you'd like to go and say, well, look, let's put up a couple of high balls in the Aviva and chase him down. Look, Freddie Stewart's obviously very solid back there. We'll try and give him as much help as possible. But earning your first cap in the Aviva against Ireland, a team very, very hard to play against, fairly renowned in terms of our ability in the air. You think of the likes of Lowe and whoever they have probably. Well, I'd say Lowe. I'm thinking Lowe probably comes straight back in, but on the right, I don't know who'll be there.
Do you think Calvin Nash is like
Nash?
Is Murley being picked there? Does that make it more likely? Obviously, Ireland's probably picked their team already, but Nash's aerial prowess versus Caden Murley, who maybe isn't known for that side of the game, like that might be a good matchup for Ireland.
It feels like an obvious place to go, guys, doesn't it? I mean, I think you'd say, look, if you're looking at places on that English team, you're thinking, it looks fairly solid for the most part. Smith, obviously, is a small enough guy, but he for the most part, he makes his tackles. But I'd certainly be sending either Aki or Henshaw or whoever is in the Irish centres. You're going down his channel. You're getting Low running down his channel as much as possible. Get big runners, because while he's he's up for the fight, he's a small man. So I'd be taking him on. I'd be trying to wear him down a little bit in there as well. Be very, very physical with him. So that's another guy. And he finds himself in the backfield a lot as well. So look, while Ireland need to be expansive, I think they need to be pragmatic as well. That's another area. I think if you're looking at England, I'd be saying, right, well, where are a couple of areas where you could probably attack them? I think it's probably the high ball, Will, isn't it? Because Smith is very dangerous back there. But if you have someone running down on him, and with the new rules in place, you'll get a chance to compete with Smith and Murley if your high balls are good. So I think that'll be it'll be a nice route into the game, and it'll be sensible at home, put pressure on a few guys who maybe don't like that. And then I think, look, it probably is more about, Ireland at that stage. Like, I think the centres probably cancel themselves out, don't they, a little bit? Like, both very experienced, I think, for the most part, whoever Ireland have in that in terms of a pairing. And then I think it probably come down to the set piece is very, very key against this English team. I think they'll be quite strong there, Will. And again, we missed Furlong a little bit. So, it's an interesting. I think this is a tight game. I don't know. Do you have a view on that, Rhodes? I mean, I'm trying to think of ways you'd attack that English team. I think, you'd hope Ireland will be focusing on, like, good line-out ball would be very important for us, I think. And it's been a challenge for a while. And England, I think, are pretty decent there. Any thoughts on where you'd attack the English team?
But just before Rudd comes in on that, could I just want to ask you your view on the wing? Like, is Hansen coming straight back into the team, do you think? Or is Calvin Nash going to get the nod? What do you reckon there?
My sense is it will be Hansen and Lowe on the wings. Although I think Nash put himself in a really good position with that performance in Northampton. I thought he looked really sharp, really quick, really powerful. But I do think Hansen had a difficult November. But ever since that Leinster game when he got a bit annoyed, in that Leinster game when he got a bit annoyed, he looked very good. I thought he kind of played his way into that game. And if they can find that, I just think he gives them that extra dimension in terms of their phase attack. That, second pair of hands on the ball. He's quite important to the way they play, but I can see the value in picking Nash. Absolutely. I think he could be a very key player for them if they went with him. And he really didn't let Ireland down when he had the jersey last year. So it's tough on him. He didn't see a minute in November. So it's been a bit of a fall off for him in terms of selection.
He's very good in the air as well, Rhodes, isn't he?
Yeah, Hansen's got it all.
I hadn't really considered him. I hadn't really been thinking about him, to be honest. I thought he was one game to go, but Hansen's the definite in there, really, isn't he?
And I'd imagine the Hansen's also, although like his outburst and the suspension had nothing to do with performance, I'd say there's a bit of cause behind him as well now. I think you probably want to remind everyone of what he's good at. Like, he's obviously been in the news for all the wrong reasons. So I said there's a motivation there. But he had the jersey coming into this window. I think they really value him. I think even though he wasn't in great form in November, I can only see Hansen starting, to be honest.
And what about the centre? Like, Rudd, what's your sense? Is it going to be Bundy, Aki, and Gary Ringrose, Robbie Henshaw? Maybe in the 23 jersey, is it going to be Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose with Bundy, Aki in the 23 jersey? Do they go 6-2 and one of those guys misses out entirely?
Yeah, it's very rare they've actually had to make this decision because one of them's usually struggling a bit with injury, but at the moment they're all fit. I think that, and Andy Farrell talked about this after the last game in November. He said, like, I come in and if one of them is picked, if one of them is left out, they're not dropped because they're three unbelievable players. And I think what they might do this week is they play a combination this week, and then the other one comes in for Scotland because they think they're all so good. I think the same applies to the back five of the scrum. I think they've got such good options in the second row that it's an embarrassment of riches in some ways. So I would say it's going to be Aki and Ringrose with Henshaw coming off the bench. I can't see them going 6-2 if they have the capacity to bring Henshaw or Aki off the bench. I think 6-2 comes into play if you don't have one of those, because like they're as powerful and as influential as any forward, and they have the capacity to bring incredible energy and power off the bench as well. So I don't think you lose anything by bringing either Aki or Henshaw off the bench. So that's where I think they're going to go in that one. But there's a couple of live selection issues here this week. Like, I think this is one of the harder Ireland teams to pick over the last while. The back five of the scrum being the other area. The back three was a big talking point. I think Keenan nailed on his spot in that Bath game, but Osborne was putting the heat on before that, and Osborne, I think, will have a role to play in this window. And obviously there's the hooker when you touched on earlier. My gut is they'll go with Sheehan in that one. I think Jack Conan's pushing hard to play 6, which will put Tyke Byrne into the row. He's in unbelievable form for Leinster. Paul O'Connell absolutely heaped praise on him last Friday. I think we could see him in from the start. So it might be, and they missed him in South Africa. They missed him in November. He doesn't get the raps for Ireland as much as he probably should, but he's enjoying a very, very fine season.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like, I think myself and Luke were calling for him to maybe be starting in the Leinster team towards the back end of last season, and people were commenting, saying that we were pushing his candidacy for some random reason, but I just thought he was playing very well and didn't even get the rub of the green at club level, let alone international level. Luke, what way would you pick kind of that 4-5-6 kind of those combinations. Like, you have a lot of options. You have obviously McCarthy, Byrne, James Ryan as second row options, Jack Conan as a 6 option, as well as Tadhg Byrne. You also have Peter O'Mahony, Ryan Baird in the squad too. Like, there's so many different options there. What would your preferred way of selecting that be?
I think I'd like to keep Conan in reserve, but I'd be bringing him on fairly early. Recognizing, of course, that he's playing brilliant rugby, but he is very dynamic off the bench. And I think Ireland missed him in that respect. So maybe I keep him in there and see who's kind of flagging in the back row, and maybe try and provide some impetus there. I think if you brought himself and Sheehan on, I mean, just think of the power that you'd get from that. The other thing I'd say, like in terms of the row, I'm probably picking. I think my preference is probably to have Byrne and Ryan. I think with McCarthy coming off the bench. And I think I'd probably have Baird at 6. I know that's probably controversial, but I just love him at this level. I just think he's very, very powerful and dynamic. I'm not sure he'd be everyone's pick, but I just
Rod
love having that little
agrees.
bit.
And Rod 100%.
I love having that extra dynamism there, that bit of pace. Like, it's nice to have something a little bit different there. And I just love that you could bring on Conan then, and you could bring on McCarthy and you could bring on Sheehan. I just think what you're bringing on there is just pure power. It's not often an Irish team has that much power on the bench, and I'd be bringing them on early as well. So it's kind of contrary to usually I like to have my big guys on the start. I know I usually bang that drum a bit, but I just think you can't leave Byrne off the pitch, and I would never leave Ryan off the pitch. I think they're very, very important. And I think they're kind of probably better for our line out to have those two guys there, if you ask me personally. And then I just love that little bit of difference that you get with Baird. And I think he's great for your line out as well. He's obviously got a great leap and he's very light. So that's probably the basis of my selection. And 7 obviously picks itself, but that's where I'm thinking. I'd love to have the power against England coming off the bench. Yeah, and I realize that I'm contradicting myself. Usually I go the other way, but that's my feeling this weekend.
I think you have to have McCarthy starting because Furlong's not there, because I think Bealham needs McCarthy's ballast behind him to keep that scrum on the road. So I think that you're possibly sacrificing your line out for your scrum, but because McCarthy is the bigger scrummager, the bigger man, that tight head lock, like Ryan can do that, but he's just not as big. And then you're down to Ryan v Byrne, and that's why they've gone Byrne at 6, because Ryan is in incredible form, and I think it'll probably be Byrne and McCarthy, and Ryan will be coming off the bench, and that is so harsh. Like, if Henshaw and Ryan miss out on this starting 15, it'll be so tough on them. And Kelleher as well. They're all playing really, really good rugby. Like, the options are there. It's a massively live selection debate this week. But I think McCarthy, because you've lost Furlong, I think you need him for your scrum.
And Rod, it's funny you mentioned how tough it would be for those guys, but how great is it for the team? Like, think back to the All Blacks game and the bench that was picked as soon as the teams were named. I know it ultimately transpired that the bench didn't offer much, but when it was named, you could probably have called that then and there. This is so different. We're just listing through all these options. Like, there's so many different combinations. Andy, that's Freudian slip. Simon Easterby could go with, although who knows who's making the decisions ultimately. What was it? Jose Mourinho was in that laundry bin back in the day. I don't know. Maybe Andy Farrell will have like a fake nose or something and be sitting in the stand, but with an earpiece. But like, there's so many different options. We're talking hooker, second row, back row, having one of those key centres. On the bench. If Sam Prendergast gets the nod, Jack Crowley coming on with a point to prove after a great performance in Northampton. We saw him do it against Australia to great effect. Like, there's a lot of options there versus November when there was a few kind of key bodies not on deck.
There was still a few options that Andy Farrell didn't take for that game. Like, he could still pick, like, Murray's going to be on the bench, Cian Healy's going to be on the bench. He could pick O'Mahony, he could pick Henderson. They're all in the squad. And I think there'll be a backlash if he does. But like, they love experience. They value experience highly. Like, that's a call. Do you go, who's covering second row? So Ryan or Henderson? Probably Ryan, because Ryan's in better form. Then you look beyond that. Who's going into that kind of covering the back row slot? Is it Peter O'Mahony? Your vice captain, or your captain up until a couple of months ago, one of your most experienced players of all time, a completely calming influence? Or is it, if Conan starts, Ryan Baird, or if Baird starts, Conan? That's the kind of call that they've often gone with the more experienced player in the past. But I think with someone like Baird, he's 25 now. He was really good off the bench in last year's Six Nations. And if you remember the England game, they had him ready to come on, and O'Mahony got himself sin binned, and they had to delay bringing him on for 10 minutes. And they they kind of lost their way in that 10 minutes. Like, it was such a difficult period for them. I think he comes onto games and he influences them. So whether it's Conan or Baird, I would prefer having that impact. And O'Mahony just hasn't played enough rugby either. Like, I wouldn't write up Peter O'Mahony off by any means, but he's only got one game under his belt, and it's a lot to ask coming into a window like this. But there is options. That there is a potential for a very dynamic and powerful Ireland bench, and a stronger one than what we saw. But there is also the potential for them to go the same way and annoy the internet in one fell swoop, to just get all the people out.
I hadn't even considered that was an option. Now that you've said it, I'm kind of like, surely not. Like, as you said, Henderson and O'Mahony have played very, very little rugby, and some of the options that we've listed are kind of more battle hard and in form. And the distinction a lot of people are making from November versus now is the body of work a lot of players have put in at provincial level. You know, some big Champions Cup games, some big Inter-Pros over Christmas. They've gotten a lot more kind of top quality rugby under their belt, so that they should be maybe more road tested and ready to go. Luke, just to go back to England for a second, it's funny where the place they are. Like, you know, they had 6 straight defeats last year until Japan at the end of November. You know, obviously on paper looks terrible. I've actually been, like, not impressed per se, but I think they've done a lot right in a lot of those games. They, unfortunately for them, they've like really badly bungled like the end of a couple of really kind of gilt edge opportunities they've had against the All Blacks, in particular Australia, infamously. And when Steve Borthwick was facing the media saying, "Oh, I've seen areas of improvement," he was getting like widely lampooned. But like, I kind of can see what he means. I do think they're playing pretty good rugby. It's just between his substitutions and just some terrible game management on the pitch, they haven't got over the line. But I actually think they are going in the right direction, even though the results might tell you completely the opposite.
Yeah, I think they're sorry, because we discussed this. Do you remember we were talking about England, New Zealand, and we were kind of saying, like, yeah, like there was definitely a couple of games where you're kind of going, do you know what? Actually, they're not that far off. And when you look at what they can put out in the pitch, like, I think pretty good. I think though, when you lose that many in a row, Will, I think, to be honest with you, they're probably it's probably a bit more of a muddled story than saying, oh well, I'm seeing some positivity here, and that's cause for calm, you know, that kind of way. Like, you still need to win games. Like, Japan can't be your only win in your last 6, and you're kind of saying we're in a good place. Like, I don't think that's true. It's not right either. Yeah, like, I still think there's that little bit of indecision that on the kind of 10 slot that hasn't really helped them. I do wonder about, like, the opportunity the opportunity missed, I think, between Pick and Mitchell and Finn. God, I'm stuck on Finn Russell, but Finn Smith. Sorry, guys, excuse me. So I just don't know why you wouldn't have the 2 club guys playing together. Northampton aren't having a great season in the league, but that's just one thing I do wonder about a little bit. Like, just in terms, we talk about some kind of odd selections and some kind of weird kind of game plans and stuff. That's one that kind of was like, I'm not sure about that one. But like, they're still going to be dangerous. You can still see the power in that pack. You can still see, where they'll be able to cause you, a bit of threat. But yeah, I mean, I still am favouring Ireland in this one, and I think I think Ireland should win it. I'd be very surprised if England do turn us over here. But the one thing that's kind of playing to their advantage is that they've got a fairly grizzled, few operators in that pack, some kind of a lot of experience. I do think both 9 and 10 are actually very good players, and they're pretty experienced internationally, relatively experienced internationally. But I just wonder about some of the combinations. I wonder about their ability to win a game. And that is a thing, you still need to be, like, we talk about Ireland not playing well, but they've still won a lot of their last games, and against very tough opposition. So, yeah, that's probably the difference between both sides at the moment, is whether England can kind of get that belief to get them over the line, the big games, have that calmness in the key moments. I wonder, it's probably a good thing that they're getting Ireland first off, because Ireland won't be that settled into the game plan. They've got that little bit of uncertainty coming into the camp themselves, because they just haven't played together in a couple of months. And they haven't been playing really well. But yeah, I'd still be surprised if they won, Will. I don't know if that's your sense of it too. I just I see how they could do it, but I don't have much confidence in them doing it.
I think, for me, I think the most likely outcome is Steve Borthwick giving yet another interview and he's saying, I'm seeing positives, guys, even though they don't get out on the right side of a result. Because I think the jump between, like, kind of blowing 4 or 5 of those 6 matches and going to the even winning is a massive jump. I do expect them to be competitive and play well, and I think their team sheet is very strong. Like, talking about the options that Ireland have, I listed a few guys earlier, like Ollie Chesham, Cunningham South. Willis, Finn Smith as an out half option. Maybe that puts Marcus Smith to full back if they're chasing the game and Freddie Stewart makes way there. Like, they do have different ways that they can play. But yeah, I do. Like, they have a very tough fixture list. They have France at home the following Saturday, so all of a sudden they could be 0 from 2. Even if they do play well, they mightn't have to do a whole pile wrong to be 0 from 2, and then all of a sudden the Six Nations is a lost championship. You're scrambling for mid-table, and the questions around Borthwick's future or how much pressure.
You'd probably say, Will, though, if you were going to get France and Ireland, you probably want to get them at the start of the competition. They've both probably got the best squads in the competition in terms of depth. They're both kind of, I would say, probably the better teams in the competition, I think, over the last kind of 4 or 5 years. I think that's fair to say. And the competition opens up for England. If they have a tight loss against Ireland and they beat France, which I think they're capable of doing, I'm not saying it's likely, but if they do that, it puts them in a brilliant position for the rest of the competition. So this could go one or two ways. I do get it. I can see a route for them to actually doing quite well in the competition. I think it opens up for them quite well.
I just feel like narratively, if you start your campaign with 3 victories and then finish with Ireland away, France home, and have 2 narrow losses, he'll come out of it with a lot of credit. Whereas if they start with 2 defeats, I think the 3 victories, if they were to follow hypothetically, I don't know if they'd have the same cachet. I just don't think. I think if the tournament is done and dusted almost after 2 matches, not to say they can't win this weekend or next weekend, but it's a tough fixture list. Rod, what's your perspective on England? Heading into this game, or anything we've just touched on in the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, I remember watching them play in New Zealand on the back of their victory against Ireland and their narrow defeat to France at the end of last year's Six Nations, and thinking this is a team on the rise and a team that's going to join the party. Because at the World Cup, I know they nearly beat South Africa in a semi-final, but around 2023 there was a really clear divide between the top 4 and the rest, and I thought England were very, very close to getting into that top 5, making it a top 5, and maybe even replacing or knocking out one of the top 4 as they went on. And then Felix Jones left and Alan Walters left in different circumstances. And the air kind of came out of the balloon a bit, and it just started to look really bad for them. Like, it's not a good look when you're losing people like that. And Jones, even David Humphries yesterday, there's a 40th slip for you. David Humphries yesterday said he's not going to be working on Irish rugby anytime soon. So there's no master plan there that we're aware of. Maybe it's back to South Africa. But he left without something lined up. He just didn't want to work there anymore. And obviously the word came out via the Sunday Times that he felt it was an unstable environment, and that was certainly attributed to his camp or him. And you're looking at a massively destabilized project, and then they have a part-time defence coach in November, and he can't go and get Phil Morrow, who he wants to get to run his S&C until now, because Saracens wouldn't let him, and you've got this lack of alignment, and you've got these central contracts, and now no one's quite sure how it's going to work, and all this sort of stuff. And then they start losing games. They the Australia game in particular was egregious. Like, they should have won that game. They're better than Australia. Losing to the All Blacks, South Africa, that happens.
But the way they lost to New Zealand, Rod, was
yeah. No, absolutely, and that's he's it's a fairly drastic move to change your captain. I know Ireland have done it as well. They've gone with Itoje. Fascinating to see how he deals with it, because he looks like a captain from the outside, but everyone he's ever worked with has said that he's quite an individual figure, that he's very focused on getting his own stuff right. And we will be watching closely to see whether he makes good decisions, whether he's able to be the player that the abrasive player that he is, the chippy player that he is, but also be able to bring himself down and make the right decisions, which is something I think James Ryan has struggled with over the years. To go to war and then to come back and make the decisions as the chief, like they're 2 different things. So there are a number of massive question marks, but there's a good team in there. I think Luke's right. The 10 doesn't match the team in my book. Like, Marcus Smith is a wonderful rugby player, but is he the 10 for Steve Borthwick rugby team? Like, George Ford and Finn Smith to me align much more closely to the way Steve Borthwick would like to play. But Marcus Smith is a star, and he's obviously all singing, all dancing, and plays and can break games open, but it doesn't necessarily fit with what they want to do. So he plays quite individually, and Borthwick is an ultimate team coach, and that just jars at me. And Ireland can, I think, turn that into a weakness. But at the same time, they have the physical capabilities, they have the players to win a game against anyone, and they have demonstrated a year ago the capacity to put together a game plan that completely turns Ireland's strengths into weaknesses, and bamboozled them a bit and beat them up a little bit. And Ireland's attack kept them in that game, but that's not functioning at the moment. Ireland will have massive question marks going into this game about their kick return. Like they turned James Lowe's long raking kicks that were such a strength into a weapon. They caught them and ran them back at Ireland, and Ireland were stunned by it. They'll miss Freeman. Not Freeman, sorry. They'll miss Furbank, the fullback. I think Stewart's not as good an attacker. He's good in the air, but Furbank opened them up as an attacking threat as well. But there's a team in there somewhere, and it's going to come out at some stage, and you just don't want to be the team that comes across them when they do come up with that 80-minute performance.
Yeah, I think you made some good points there. I agree with you about kind of the Borthwick out half, and I agree with Luke's point earlier, like pairing Finn Smith with Alex Mitchell, where they play so well together at club level, might have been a good idea. But it's interesting, obviously, picking Caden Murley, who dovetails really well with Margaret Smith at club level. They create all sorts of tries, and then as you say, Freddie Stewart at full back, which is kind of another different kind of selection. Who's a more, I suppose, traditional full back, catch and kick. So there's a lot of kind of almost contradictions, I guess, in the team, and maybe that's why they're not flying well. And even going back to November, like replacing Marcus Smith with George Ford, two completely different out halves, did seem to destabilise the team in the end game of a couple of those key matches that they ultimately didn't get out on the right side of.
But even Slade will, you kind of think, like, what would you have next to Smith? Now, I don't know what the options are really, but like that one to me sings of, I'd like to put him. I like, he's a bit of a ball player, isn't he? Like, so do you need that when you've got Smith in there? Like, that's probably the question you got to ask yourself. You probably want some extra physicality next to him. So that's the kind of the challenge. That's a kind of an interesting selection dynamic too. You just kind of wonder, is he able to fit the pieces together in his mind? Like that, to me, that feels like more someone you'd have next to Finn Smith. If I'm being completely honest, if you want to open up the pitch a little bit or to have an extra kicking option or whatever it is. So, yeah, they're interesting selections, and you do wonder about some of the combinations, don't you? So, yeah, and it does scream of a team that's kind of still figuring itself out a little bit.
Yeah, I wish we had the Ireland team sheet here that we could really kind of dig into some of the matchups, but we're kind of just speculating a little bit. Rud, I want to talk to you about France being held up as probably the tournament favourites. Maybe I think that's probably the consensus opinion. But like, it's funny. I look at France, and for all the praise they get, the club teams are going well. But like, France's Six Nations record is pretty terrible. Like, they've won the tournament once in 14 years, even in this Fabien Galtier era since like the 2019 World Cup. So if you take 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 5 tournaments, they've only won it once. They've had some fairly massive capitulations in that time as well. Like, I feel like there should be a lot of pressure on France going into this tournament. Like, I obviously don't read French media. I'm not a French speaker, but I'd like to think that in Midi Olympique and Sud-Ouest and some of these other publications that they're kind of putting a bit of the heat on them. Like, Antoine Dupont obviously didn't play last year. They had a very poor tournament by their own standards. Probably should have been even worse if Italy had gotten that retake from that penalty. Like, they have to go to Twickenham, they have to go to Dublin. Like, what are you making of France at the moment? Like, I feel like it's a big tournament for them. Like, they haven't really achieved a whole pile in this era. Like, they didn't do that well at the World Cup, losing at home to South Africa in the quarterfinals. As I said, they've won 1 Six Nations out of 5. Like, they don't have a whole pile to show for how good they've been.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. I think they were the best of the European teams in November, particularly beating the All Blacks that night. It was a battle. It wasn't a vintage French performance, but they battled their way to a win. And the reason they're favourites is Antoine Dupont. Let's face it, him being back moves the dial, and they are the bookies' favourites. It's not just kind of pundits and stuff who are putting them up there, but their schedule's very, very difficult, and I can't see them doing a slam going to London and Dublin. And the London test, like, Twickenham depends on how this weekend goes in some ways, but even if England lose against Ireland, they're on the rebound. There's a bit of a backlash there. And I know France absolutely ran riot there 2 years ago in their last visit, but even that surely will inspire England to not let it happen again. And England have closed the gap on them in the 2 years since. So there's question marks, but there's a lot of very good players. They're drawing from, they kind of bulk pick Bordeaux and Toulouse players with a smattering of La Rochelle lads thrown in as well. A lot of them are playing very well. Like, Aldridge's one of a player that I really admire an awful lot. Entamac is back in form. He doesn't get the highlights because Dupont is alongside him, but he's a phenomenal player. They've good midfielders. They have a hooker who's in Mavaka who's as good as Sheehan, Malcolm Marks. He's right up there. They're always strong in the scrum. They've got animal second rows of a profile that most other nations just can't find.
Is Marchand back as well?
I think so, but I don't think he starts anymore. I think he's kind of, but that's
It's
almost
some
like your
1-2 punch.
Kelleher.
You talk about our 1-2
Yeah,
punch, like that's right up there with us, isn't it? And South Africa.
absolutely, absolutely, and their set piece is very strong as well. So they're right in the mix. I think Ireland and France will be my two favorites for the tournament. I think the last couple of years it's been a 3-tier tournament, and those two have been out in front. And they haven't been able to get it done. Like they contributed to a wonderful game in Dublin 2 years ago, but Ireland blew them away in the last 20 minutes with Ross Byrne and Craig Casey pulling the strings. Last year they looked like the World Cup hangover actually was a thing. You know, Ireland kind of dismissed the World Cup hangover. You could even they didn't even bother dismissing it. They just said they were broken by the World Cup. But by the end, against England, they did find something. And they look like a team again. So yeah, they probably have underachieved, Will, but they have excellent players and have an excellent chance. And they do have the magic man pulling the strings back again. And we saw in the Champions Cup final, certainly up close and personal, that he didn't win that game on his own. That'd be unfair on Tom Willis and lots of other great Toulouse players. But he went to a
It was
level.
bloody close. It was bloody
Jack
close.
Willis. Like he went to a level that day.
He was kicking Rhodes was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Turnovers, breaks, he's ridiculous.
Yeah, he was
chasing down Dan Sheehan that time and getting that turnover was like absolutely
like, honestly
unbelievable.
Literally watching his highlights. Do you ever watch like a random top 14 like a highlights reel of him? Like I remember I watched one last year and I was like, there's not one part of that game that he didn't like. He nearly short of going into the scrum, like it was like
those highlights packages, like him moving out to 13, spare me. Like he's a scrum half. I don't like when they're doing this, moving him around and like for half an hour when they're hammering teams. I feel like Dupont thinks he's mastered scrum half and he wants to like do something else. But look, I actually think this is a big tournament for Dupont. As I said, like when I'm talking about France, I'm kind of talking about Dupont to a degree as well. Like he didn't play last year for his reasons for the sevens. Ultimately, he won an Olympic gold medal, so you know he kind of shut me up for my criticism to some degree, but. I think like for a player as good as him to only have one Six Nations medal and he's kind of the key guy, I think not that he's ever played kind of very poorly in the Six Nations, but he's someone as well who I think would they
know who managed him very well, Will? I think Ireland managed him quite well. Is that fair?
I think so. Until that Champions Cup final, I thought Leinster.
Like really,
yeah.
You think of like some of the games in the Six Nations, guys, and you're kind of thinking, Jesus, like he had a crossfield kick, he had a pass out the back for 30 yards for a try, or he made a break, offloaded, and he has all these kind of moments against other teams. Like the big moments I can think about against Ireland are probably more like the tackle against Hansen on the line, but it's not really the attacking stuff as much as I think of. I don't know if you just, if you think back, you go, God, he's magic. But has he had those moments against Ireland? I think Ireland marshaled him quite well. I think. I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, I think they've set traps for him a few times. Like I think they kind of almost bait him into going on his own and then kind of close off the support and force turnovers. I think you're right. Probably that 2022 game when Carberry started, he had a good day. Like France won that game, they won the slam. He did play well that day, but. I don't think he's had his best days against Ireland, and they have come up with good strategies to at least neutralize him to some extent. He'll always have some sort of a moment, but like that he's not the dominant figure in the game.
Rod, it's funny just thinking about France. Like as you said, they have to go to Ireland, they have to go to England. Like England have Ireland away this weekend, then have a short turnaround to play France. Like the fixture list 100% favours Ireland more than any other team. Like even Scotland, who are being talked up by some of their own players again, like they have to go to England and they have to go to France.
Such a slight shot, Will.
No, but it's can't let it go. It's like if not now, when? I'm like, well, they have to go to France and England, so it's not going to be this year. Like, so I'll tell you, it won't be like if not now, when? Well, next year potentially. It won't be like they have no Tui Pilatu, who's probably a form centre in European rugby, and their fixture list is a really difficult one. Like the Ireland fixture list. If Ireland play as good as they can, I think Ireland have the best path to the Six Nations and will win it. For me, it's about Ireland turning up just because their fixture list is so much easier than the other ones. Like Scotland away is their most difficult game, which is difficult, 100%. But Gregor Townsend is 0-10 against Ireland for a reason. Like Ireland have been very successful against Scotland. So just looking at the fixture list, Rud, it is set up for Ireland.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and that's kind of why that and the kind of recent provincial form is why I've become quite confident that Ireland can do something this month. Now, I did think Scotland looked like a very dangerous game, especially because they've got Italy first up. I know they lost Italy last year, but I'm pretty sure that's at Murrayfield.
It is, yeah.
They have an 8-day turnaround then to get ready for Ireland, who will have to leave it out there against England. So they will I would imagine Townsend's been putting together strategies and plans for Ireland from a good way out. And in fairness to them,
He's been trying that
they've
for a while,
came
to
as
be fair.
close. But yeah, but you dismiss it all you like. But like they came to Dublin last year and they nearly did it. Like they took Ireland. It was a weird, horrible game. But that's maybe where Scotland have to take Ireland to beat them. And 2 years ago, I know it ended with Ireland pulling away, but Ireland were in a dark place in that first half when they were losing bodies, and Scotland scored and they went in at half time. And something happened to Scotland at half time. They almost believed they'd won the game, and they came out and were terrible after half time. They had Ireland where they wanted them. So they are a team who's capable of troubling Ireland, although Ireland always end up winning in the end. And I think Townsend, I spoke to him at the launch, and I'll run a piece in the next while. That's he sees that as their next great battle. Like they've broken the England thing. They used to never beat England, and now they beat England all the time. And he thinks it's a mental challenge to get over Ireland. But to me, once I saw Tuipulotu was out, that's it. That's good night, Irene. They don't have the depth to cope with a loss like that. They have a few of their forwards missing as well. I think that's a difficult game on Sunday week, but it's navigable. And then if Ireland do win their opening two games, then they've got Wales 2 weeks after Scotland, which is a game they should win while rotating their squad. And they essentially have 4 weeks to prepare for that France game at home, which is the title decider. So your point about the schedule is nailed on. It is there for Ireland. Like it's written out like completely, but it all comes down to this Saturday.
Do you know a big thing about the schedule? Obviously, in odd numbered years, like England and France have always been home games. The key difference now is Wales have fallen so far that was the tricky away fixture in those years. You'd have to go to Cardiff under Warren Gatland, and often they turned Ireland over. I don't think Joe Schmidt won once in Cardiff during his time in charge, which shows how difficult it was during that era. Like, and for Scotland, like I'm not. No, I was kind of joking there. I don't think Ireland will just roll into Murrayfield and just easily win or anything. But even if Scotland do beat Ireland, they have to still go to Twickenham and go to Paris. So there's no like easy path for them to win a Six Nations. They've never even won 4 games out of 5 or finished second. So like even getting 4 to 5 would be a decent scalp. And the one thing in France's favour, I guess, is after they play England, they start with Wales on a Friday night, so they have an 8-day turnaround to England. Then they have a week off. Then they think they play Italy. Then they have another week off. And then they go to Dublin. So they do have a nice kind of little way of kind of easing their way in, in the middle of the tournament to that Irish fixture. Luke, what's your thoughts on Scotland? Like, do you agree with Rudd? Like the Tuipulotu injury is such a killer. He's was being talked about as a potential lion. He hopefully can still get back and play the back end of the club year and get into that squad. But massive loss. He had a great November. He's been getting better over the last couple of seasons.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think he's obviously very physical, but he's got some nice skills too, doesn't he? You just kind of see that with Glasgow. Very, 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 very strong player, and a key guy for them. But also he's made the step up internationally. So yeah, look, I mean, I think I was probably a little bit surprised. Maybe seems like he's been talked up. I saw that. Was it Drico? I thought maybe he was saying something about him possibly being the 12 for the Lions. I thought I might have seen him say that maybe. And I think he was picking ring rows on the outside of that. But yeah, look, it was an interesting combination from a guy who really knows. I'm pretty sure he did say Tuipulotu. But anyway, lots of people are talking him up too. Not unusual, in fairness. I would agree with you. The Scots do like to talk themselves up. I'm not disputing that, but I think they've been going all right, and they do pose a threat. I would say the biggest point with them is they've never been able to produce that kind of consistency across the competition for me, and that's been their biggest killer. They're capable of a big performance. You're kind of just hoping that's not against Ireland, but in fairness, Ireland have been able to manage those big periods where Scotland have their kind of tails up and they might be ahead or they might be in a good position against us, but Ireland always seem to have a way to win against them, whether it's a toughness thing or just, I think, maybe the little bit of success, or sorry, a lot of success that Ireland have had in the last kind of 10 or 15 years in this competition. I think that's ingrained in them now at this stage. I think Ireland kind of expect to win, whereas I think for Scotland, I think Townsend is right about that, is that there is some kind of mental block there because they've blown up on so many occasions against Ireland. And even when Ireland are beating them well, the England thing, they've been able to get across the hurdle and they've been able to come back from these kind of like what seems like sometimes insurmountable kind of deficits. They seem to be able to come back in those games, but never against Ireland. So, yeah, look, they're dangerous, Finn Russell's playing well. His kicking's good. I think he was brilliant last year's competition. But I just don't know if they've got the depth against the big teams to win 3 of them. I don't see them beating all 3 of Ireland, England, and France. I just can't see that.
Yeah, like to be fair, like I was having a bit of fun at Gregor Townsend's expense earlier. Like the 4 wins in a row against England, they haven't lost at Twickenham since 2017, which is kind of mad. Like they really have, kind of broken that hoodoo. And their record against France isn't bad either. Like it is Ireland that they kind of just, as Rudd mentioned, like that game in Murrayfield when I think were they a point down at half time or a point up? I can't remember. And like it was all set up for the second half for them to finally get over that hump, and they ended up getting hammered by like 15 points or so. So that was a massive missed opportunity, and did speak to maybe some sort of mental block, which to be fair, Ireland have had with certain teams in the past, like at the All Blacks. There was occasions where they were there for the taking and Ireland couldn't do it, and it took a while to get over that hump. Guess we'll finish up with Six Nations predictions, guys. I'll go to you first, Rudd. Maybe one for Saturday, and then for the tournament in general. Who you think will win the Six Nations? Will it be 3 in a row for Ireland?
Yeah, that's who I'm tipping. We did a jury on Monday where we all had to do this, and I did tip Ireland to win it. So I got to stick and be consistent. It was before Furlong got injured, and I do think his absence brings them back to the pack and makes them more vulnerable. Good players as Finlay Bealham is, they're missing their 1 and 3 in their tight head depth chart coming into the tournament, and that's not a great spot to be in. There's a lot on Bealham's shoulders, and Tom Clarkson. Thomas Clarkson's never played in a Six Nations game before. He could be coming in a tight game against England, and you lose to England, and that's a very different perspective on how it's all going to go, because suddenly the Scotland game becomes difficult, and this schedule that we're looking at going, this is lined up for Ireland, becomes a bit of a tricky one. So, but I do think, I don't know, you look at the names on the Ireland team sheet that's going to be coming out on Thursday. You look at the players, flick through the pictures of what's going on over here. There is phenomenal, experienced players in this Ireland squad who have done it over and over again. And apart from Tyg Furlong, they're all fit and they all look in incredible nick. They've all been playing like Ty Byrne was brilliant for Munster in his last game. Caelan Doris and Josh van der Fleer are in career best form. Sheehan looked like he'd never been away last Saturday. James Lowe looked as sharp as I've seen him for a long time. The break has done him good. You have players across the Ireland team who are capable of winning big test matches, and they're home to the other best teams in the tournament. I guess the question mark is their November form, the Leinster divergence, and they have whoever they pick at 10, and I think it's going to be Sam Prendergast, a very inexperienced player in the most important position, and that is a risk as well. I presume they're backing one of them and they're allowing them to lead, because I think if you have any uncertainty in that position, it could bleed into the team. But the strength is that Prendergast is a fine player, and that Jack Crowley's a brilliant impact sub to be bringing on. And you've also got a third guy in Kieran Frawley. If things go wrong, he can come in as well. But that is I think until we see him do it at Six Nations level, that is still going to be a risk. So there is some question marks over them, like there are over other teams. But I do believe that. Sorry, and I didn't even mention the Andy Farrell factor, which is a factor as well. But I do believe that the players are
leave some of my points, Rudd.
sorry, but they're in
playing the absolute repeater here.
Sorry, but I do think they're the best team in the tournament coming into it, and they have the run. They have the run of fixtures.
It's funny. I'm actually proud of us that we completed our preview without mentioning the out half debate, really, and without mentioning Andy Farrell's sabbatical, really. We've talked about those so much, so I don't feel like we're leaving the listener in the dark, really. I feel like they know our opinions on all those matters pretty well, and I'm sure we'll recircle to them after the England game. Rudd, I'm actually going to flip from my jury prediction. I did go with France, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to go with Ireland now after listening to this back and forth discussion between yourself, Luke, and myself over the last while. But I do think it's predicated on the first question I asked, or one of the first ones.
That's not allowed. Once you put it in print, you got to stick with it. Like that's.
I'll just go into the back end on the website and change it. No one will be any the wiser. I think I'll wait until the end of the tournament and go back in and change it to make it look like I knew it all along. That's what I traditionally do, unbeknownst to anyone. But I think Andrew Goodman's point about like the skill level, that's what I'll be looking for. I think if Ireland can get that piece right, not to say that the line out, all the other stuff isn't important, but I think Ireland playing well, the handling and the passing has to be crisp when they're really motoring. I think that's what I really look for and like to see. So if they get that right, I think the rest of the stuff could follow to some degree. And as I said, the fixture list I think is probably the kindest to Ireland. I'm kind of humming and hawing about, like, I think Ireland either kind of win a slam or don't win the Six Nations. I think if they slip up, I don't think they will have enough points overall maybe to go that route and still win it. It's hard to know. You're really kind of crunching the numbers and getting the eggheads to look at things then, but that's my sense of it. But Luke, I'll give you the last bite of it then. How do you think Saturday will go, and how do you think the championship will go overall?
The only thing I disagree with on Rhodes possibly is that I think France might have a better team, maybe better squad, but it's bloody close. I think, I think the fixture list, like every year, like it's such a you hate boiling it down to that, but like being at home in an international is massive. Like it's really difficult to turn Ireland over at home. It's very, very rare that you do that. So I think that's the key component. And I think Ireland win the tournament. I think they're probably allowed a tight slip up somewhere along the way. It has to be very tight, but they do have Italy at the end of the tournament, which generally doesn't bode well for Italy because they have the skinniest squad, and throughout the weeks there's generally a good few injuries and that. So I think they get impacted there. So, and you'll be on a kind of a hard ground in kind of March. I agree with Rudd's point on Furlong, but it's probably most important that he's back for the French game. And I'm hoping that that's not too serious an injury. It's look, that he's flying back straight away means that it's something, but he's got a bit of time to get back for the French match, which is the kind of key one. So I'm praying. Obviously, we don't know at this point, but I'm praying that he's back for that one because that's the key one for me. And then would like to talk about the 10 situation a little bit. I think that's a really important point that Rudd's made about, like Six Nations is still quite different to November, guys. Like it's really like playing all your matches at home is very different to playing some away matches. Like the physicality in Six Nations, guys, is just a massive step up, and it's a bit of a tighter competition. It's played kind of in not great conditions as well. Playing at home when it like the physicality from the opposition team playing at home, like and I wouldn't say like, look, he's filling out. He's still a young guy, but I wouldn't say his physicality is his best attribute. Like he's a lovely, skillful player. He's actually not as slow as I thought he was. He's actually got a bit of top end pace, but he's still a little bit loose, and like that's a it can be a good or a bad thing. But we see loads of brilliant players. Marcus Smith being a perfect example. Guys who are Finn Russell as well struggle to kind of really establish themselves in teams or be really, really solid, because that's kind of what's required in this competition. Most of the best out halves that have done brilliant for a long time in this competition are pretty solid operators, and it's hard to be the flair player in this tournament because, as I said, difficult conditions, teams playing away, playing them away from home. It's bloody difficult competition, guys, and it's a really difficult place to play. So yeah, like that's definitely a risk factor with picking Prendergast there. The good thing is that they can rotate quite quickly back to a known quantity, a guy who's won the tournament, who's guided them through in Crowley, who actually is playing quite well. So I think that's the mitigating factor on the 10 situation if it's going wrong for Prendergast. But certainly, like, yeah, like it's not a dead cert for Ireland, but probably leaning on their ability to win when they're not playing great and having the better fixture list, guys. So long-winded way, Ireland.
Yeah, I suppose it was a benefit maybe to Sam Prendergast got that exposure in La Rochelle, because that was a very physical afternoon. Not that he was going around smashing La Rochelle players or anything like that, but in terms of the matchups in this tournament, Wales away, Italy away, Scotland away, probably not the physical challenge that La Rochelle will be. I get it, it's not test match level, but La Rochelle have probably 15 internationals or close to it, and some.
I think you might be underestimating people putting their international jersey on. Will,
fair enough.
Like, I swear to God, it's like kamikaze out there. I really, I wish you could feel the physicality of it. It is 100%. I know La Rochelle are brilliant, but there is a step up going to international level in the physicality stakes. Now they might have a bit more quality, etc., but I would argue an international test match is on another level physicality wise to even a top class European game. It's close. It's bloody close, but there's guys looking to die for theirs. There's guys crying before the matches. We're singing their national anthem. Like there's guys going out there to die. Like, do you know what I mean? I hate to pull you up on that one, but I just think he needs to be ready for that. That's a big challenge for a 10,
No, fair enough, as you say, that game of Murrayfield, if he's still starting the following week, if he starts this weekend as well, obviously, but it looks that way. The following week will be a new experience again. Sorry, not to reopen this debate we're about to finish up, but we're spending a lot of time talking about fixture lists. Is there any merit in swapping the fixtures around every 10 years or something like that? Like we've got the same fixtures for 125 years or whatever, and it feels it's dictating so much of the narrative that would it not be a help to kind of swap these things every so often so you don't have the exact same run?
I can see the argument for it. I think if you ask the unions, they need if there was a rejig and one lost out on a home game, it would cost them gate receipts alone are worth 25% of the RFU's income stream. So if you did a rejig next year and you lost one of your 3 home games that you rely on, I think the unions would be against that. But
You get it
to be honest,
this year.
Well, potentially, I think from a competition point of view, it would be good to do it every so often. But I also think it should be open to promotion, relegation, and there's lots of things you could do to the Six Nations. I'd like to see Portugal, Georgia have a chance to play in it. I'd like to see it expanded. I'd like to even maybe mess with what time of year it's played for a season structure. But we definitely don't have time to get into all that.
No. We'll put a pin in that.
Jesus Christ,
we'll put a pin in that one.
It's time to go.
Especially because I don't think
I haven't even started working it.
Ireland wouldn't want to be changing anytime soon either. I think they're happy with how the fixture list divvies out every second year. For now, I'd like to thank Luke and Rudd for joining me for our bumper Six Nations preview. That was actually 2 minutes shorter than last week's podcast, so it just goes to show you bumper is more of a state of mind than an actual podcast length. Rudd, Sinead and Keane will be at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, and you can get a podcast with all their thoughts afterwards. And then next week, myself and Luke will be back digesting the England game and looking ahead to the Scotland game. So until next time, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.